thank you to GCM Grosvenor and Resolute Investment Managers Inc. for sponsoring Series 3 of 2025. GCM Grosvenor is a global alternative asset management firm with a long-standing commitment to supporting small, emerging and diverse investment managers. For over 30 years, the firm has developed expertise in funding and guiding these managers as part of its broader activity across alternative investments. With over 20 billion in assets under management dedicated to small and emerging managers and 16 billion in assets under management dedicated to diverse managers, GCM Grosvenor leverages its experienced team, broad network and proprietary sourcing capabilities to support their success. Through the Small, Emerging and Diverse Manager Programme, the firm creates opportunities for investors to access a wide range of talent while seeking to drive strong returns and impact. Resolute Investment Managers Inc. is a diversified multi-affiliate asset management platform that partners with over 30 best-in-class affiliated and independent investment managers. Its unique platform delivers strategic value through a full suite of distribution, operational, and administrative services available to affiliates and partners.
I do have a creator motto, which is also my advice to my younger self, which is be sure that people know that I'm kind before they think that I'm smart. When I was younger, I always felt like I had to lead with smart. I mentioned that I was a first-generation college student, and it was really important for me that people knew that I was smart. And I was probably in my 30s before I realized that what I was doing was putting up barriers to a relationship. And so when I stopped doing that, my life became much richer.
I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Lisa Laird, who is CIO at Mercy Investment Services in St. Louis. She's previously held senior strategist roles as well as other healthcare leadership roles, and currently holds a number of additional board roles. Welcome, Lisa. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me today, Ethan.
Well, let's start by talking about your background and how you came to enter the world of investing. Did it take any surprising turns along the way?
Well, when I was a little girl, after I wanted to be a ballerina, I remember telling my mother that I wanted to be a social worker. And obviously, I didn't pursue that. One of the reasons is I was good at math. I was a first-generation college student, and I needed to do something practical. So I pursued finance, and I thought I would go into corporate finance, and I did for a while. That wasn't quite the right fit. And early in my career, I took a trip around the world. I had the opportunity. I went with Habitat for Humanity, and I traveled around the Southern Hemisphere, and I came back 3 months later, and I needed a job. And I ran into a former classmate, and he said, well, my company's hiring. And I said, well, what is it that you do? And he said, well, I'm in manager research. It was a little like being an equity analyst for money managers. And I thought to myself, that has got to be one of the most boring things I could ever possibly imagine. But I needed the interview practice. So I went and they hired me. The company was Wilshire Associates, and it was an amazing training ground, and I've never looked back. And so I got into the investing world a little by accident.
And take us then through the journey from Wilshire into other roles. I mentioned you'd had some healthcare leadership roles.
I did. I was in consulting for about a decade, and I was offered the opportunity to interview in Catholic healthcare. And I thought, wow, this is an organization that is touching people at their most vulnerable. And I have the opportunity to use my skill set at an organization that is really close to that helping role that I was so attracted to as a young girl. So I was in Catholic healthcare at both St. Joseph Health and then St. Joe's and Providence came together. I left to care for my father, whose health was failing. I had a couple of other roles with entrepreneurial ventures that were very exciting. The most recent of which was Investment Office Resources with Tony Waskowitz, who I know you know well. But I was always looking for that next allocator role. And so when the Mercy opportunity came up, I jumped at it.
Well, we'll certainly launch into that. I think let's just go there now. So can you tell us a little bit about your role at Mercy and what's at the forefront of your mind as you look at the investment landscape today?
So I just want to differentiate between Mercy Investment Services and Mercy, the healthcare organization. Both were founded by the Sisters of Mercy, but the investment offices are not related. Mercy Investment Services actually manages the assets of the Sisters of Mercy. And so we manage assets in accordance with their values. And so top of mind for me today is, how do we manage the assets in accordance with their values in an environment where policy is seeming to work against that? So they have 5 critical concerns. There are the environment, racial equity, women, immigration, and nonviolence. And in some ways, those are a little like dirty words at the moment. And so trying to navigate that when you have programs or offerings like an environmental solutions fund and an inclusive opportunities fund is a little challenging. We also do, we vote our proxies in accordance with the values of the sisters. We have a community investment fund, and we do shareholder advocacy.
And you mentioned it can be challenging. Do you find that it's challenging to get a selection of products that meet your values? Do you find that you have to get over any return differential in those products? Because there can be, at times, a return differential when you decide to exclude certain areas. What is it like to be forging this path today, given that, I suppose, many would only do this to a small degree or with that 5 priorities as you listed?
And I don't know that we can pursue the entirety of the 5 priorities. Nonviolence is really hard to manifest in an investment portfolio. Immigration is also hard to manifest in an investment portfolio. So we tend to focus on the environment and racial equity and equity for women. So yes, I think it can be hard to find product. It's not impossible, though. And at times there can be a return differential. We don't have exposure to energy. When energy does really well, that's hard on relative returns. We have to make it up somewhere.
And just in terms of your governance, how is this all monitored and overseen?
There's quite a governance structure. So at the top is the ministry leadership team, which is made up of 5 sisters. And then the board of directors of Mercy Investment Services is under that. There are 5 committees, 2 of which are the investment committee that I report to and support, and the social responsibility committee. And so those 2 work together on certain initiatives like the Inclusive Opportunities Fund, like the Mercy Partnership Fund. There's also a subcommittee that focuses on community or place-based investing.
I'd love to dig into that a little more, because I would say that I find this is sort of, I don't have many discussions like this. Maybe there are not that many religious orders that are pursuing their values in this way. I'd love to know, like, when you speak about place-based investing, what you have in mind. Is it this place? We're in St. Louis today. Or is it any place where you may find you can make an impact?
So in our case, it's any place. So we have investments here in St. Louis. We have investments in the broader United States. We have investments throughout the world. One of the investments that just makes my heart sing is an organization called Meds and Foods for Kids, which makes a peanut butter-like substance in Haiti. And that peanut butter-like substance delivers nutrition to people who need it. So it's investing in things like that that help establish a company in a place or in a way that might not otherwise be able to get off the ground, that has that serving component.
And how does an opportunity like that come to your attention? How do you find these?
So Mercy Partnership Fund is a 30-year initiative. And so it's actually spearheaded by a colleague of mine, Sarah Smith, who's been doing this for quite some time. And she's incredibly well known in that part of our investment world. And so opportunities tend to come to us. Similarly, on the market rate side where I focus, sometimes organizations realize what our focus is and they seek us out. We're also always looking.
And do you speak with other like-minded investors, other religious organizations, maybe consultants focused on that? And what's that landscape like as far as you can see?
So we do. There is a network of other religious organizations. I think Mercy Investment Services is a bit at the forefront in many cases. So it was founded in 2008. The president and chief investment officer, formerly chief investment officer, is Brian Piney. And so he really put this all together. The sisters, when they originally sought to have their own investment company or family office, they were managing their assets in a variety of different places. So every congregation, every group of sisters had their own asset manager. They had their own investment accounts. And they realized that they would have the benefits of consolidation if they pulled everything together. So they hired Brian, and Brian created the company that we have now.
And in terms of the responsiveness, say, of fund providers or partners that you work with, how responsive do you find they are in terms of tailoring products to meet your values? And I suppose you mentioned the political climate maybe not being that fertile right now for ideas like this. Have you found that the opportunity set has shrunk?
I found that the information available is likely to shrink. I don't know that there will be a lot of change in terms of what is offered, but I think we're seeing changes in how people talk about it and how much they're willing to disclose. We are, as I said, kind of really well known for values, being values forward. And many organizations, they want to serve their clients. And if their clients are value forward, they will want to establish a product or help us in that way. It depends on the asset class, though, because in large cap US equities, you can find somebody to manage a separate account for you that's screened and focused on carbon emission reduction. In emerging markets, we're not big enough to have a separate account that focuses on emerging markets. We also don't want the administrative pain of having to open up all of those countries. And so we need to find partner organizations that are similarly minded to manage those assets on our behalf.
And I suppose, how do you see this as evolving? Do you see that the landscape of suitable products will evolve further? Are you optimistic? We talked about it shrinking. So I hope we're not like, generally, we tend to see things get better over time. And maybe just in thinking about this evolution question, there's been a lot of discussion of ESG and it being the wrong term at the wrong time. And that really is just about risk management, and that certain aspects that needs to be broken up, certain aspects maybe stand alone, like governance. How do you see this landscape of choice for your type of values-driven investing evolving?
The answer is I don't actually know. And so we will see how it comes to evolve. I do think it's much easier for us to find managers who focus on the G of ESG, which is a term that we're not using quite so much anymore. But being value-centric and centered in the values of a group of women religious, the S and the E are also really important components for us.
And I'd love to then talk about one aspect of the S, I suppose, the diversity question, given that this podcast had its roots in wanting to showcase a diverse group of investment professionals and how they succeed in different ways in the industry. You've been in the industry for some time, going back to your Wilshire days. How would you kind of assess the diversity, and how do you feel it feels now to be a senior woman in this industry?
I think we still have a ways to go. I think it's always aspirational. I think certainly there are more women than when I started in the industry, and I expect that after me, there will be a higher percentage of women in the industry. I think we face a couple of challenges. One is there's not a huge amount of turnover in our industry. And so whereas an investment bank has a pipeline into business schools and can take a lot of people, the asset management business tends not to take as many. I think another challenge is relationship.
Right.
It's huge for our industry. And so I love organizations like Girls Who Invest and the National Association of Securities Professionals that help to bridge that gap to make it so that more people are aware of the industry. I had no idea that this existed when I was in P school.
No. I think there's a great term for that, which is social capital. Some people come to their professional lives with abundant social capital, as well as other forms of capital. And some, I think, come with a very short supply of social capital. And sometimes it's nothing to do with what they've done at university. It's really just a question of how they grew up. So I think that network effect is key as you think about the social capital that can be brought to bear and how important that is. You have a number of board roles that I mentioned in the bio. Anything you can tell us about those board roles and what you seek to bring to them?
So I am thrilled to be part of two nonprofit boards. The first is the SEBA Foundation, and I've been involved with SEBA for about 15 years. We seek to eradicate curable blindness globally and have helped over 64 million people with their vision and vision impairment. It costs $50 to restore someone's sight if they have cataracts. The economic impact of restoring someone's sight is massive because not only do they get to go back to work, but the people who have been helping them also get to go back to work. And so at one point, the World Health Organization called it the biggest bang for your buck. My role is finance and investing. So I am a finance chair for both of the nonprofits that I serve. The other one is the Center for Action and Contemplation. And that is a newer role for me. And I am tickled to death, to say the least, and incredibly humbled by the opportunity. The CAC teaches Christian contemplative practices with the goal of inspiring loving action. So it was founded by a Franciscan friar by the name of Richard Rohr. He is an author. He recently released a book, The Tears of Things, which made it to #2 on the New York Times bestseller list. This subtitle is Prophetic Wisdom for an Age of Outrage. And so it really put its finger on this time at its release. Most people interact with the CAC through the daily meditations. So hundreds of thousands of people receive the daily meditations, and a number of money managers, as they look at my LinkedIn bio, they're like, oh my gosh, I get those meditations. I love to receive them. So I'm thrilled at the opportunity to serve both.
Wonderful. And we'll put links to those meditations as well as the books in the show notes so that we can definitely capture those. And I suppose both of these organizations, I think, are probably dependent on a certain amount of abundance in the giving landscape. And how are you finding the current climate? I know that it's been tough, I think, for many nonprofits with not only federal funding cutbacks, but also just a general climate of austerity. I suppose, how has it been in these entities of the current climate?
I think challenging. And I think the full impact is yet to be seen. I think in particular with a service organization or an organization that facilitates service, when donors see a need that they deem as immediate, like food, like shelter, and they see the pullback of USAID, and they say, well, maybe blindness might wait. And that, it's hard, right? It is possible that we will see a decline in revenue. It's also possible that we won't. I think the CAC is a bit of a different animal as far as it's a teaching organization. It's more educational, supportive that way. And I'm new to the organization, and I don't know that I have as much insight as to the potential impact of the current environment.
Right. And in terms of one of the other things we try to bring on this podcast is a bit of insight into how to be an effective board member or investment committee member, given that that's the one thing with no playbook or no kind of manual. And key governance, I think, is one of the most critical parts of making these organizations work effectively. And I don't think we're all so busy in our lives, and sometimes this is only part of what we do, that we don't always get taught the best way to approach these governance tasks. How do you seek to become an effective board member, and what do you think it is to be an effective board member?
So back to basics, I like to come prepared. And I also like to make sure that my value per word is appropriate per word spoken. So I don't want to be talking for the sake of talking. I want to make sure that I am providing the organization with some value and the subject that they brought me on the board for. And in my case, that's always finance.
And you're comfortable with challenging and speaking up, which I think is something that's not always easy, I say, in these board situations, to actually speak up, which is arguably why you're there.
Right.
But
it's a requirement.
Challenging. Right, exactly. The talent side of active management, just before we move to some personal reflections, attracting talent. You've been in many different walks of this industry, whether the consulting firm or within an investment office. And you mentioned the pipeline being a challenge because there's not a lot of turnover. How do you think we do better at least attracting more into that pipeline? Maybe we can deal with the turnover point later. But I think in terms of the talent into the industry, how would you do it?
Well, I think that's where organizations like Girls Who Invest are really great, right? I mean, they're catching women when they're juniors in college and exposing them to this industry and assigning them a mentor or an ambassador and helping them to create those connections. So being involved with organizations like that, I think, is very helpful.
Yeah. And then just moving to some personal reflections. So I was intrigued by the discussion of wanting to be a ballerina. Was that genuine, or was this just the little girl? Okay.
No, it was. I did it for a long time. And I'm tall. And so I wasn't ever good enough. I wasn't going to be good enough to be a prima ballerina. And so I would have to be in the chorus. And it was thought that I was too tall. So I didn't pursue that. And then I was offered the opportunity to study assembly language, which many of your listeners probably won't even know what it was. It was a very early computer language. It was kind of just above binary. And I studied that at Rockwell International, and I kind of left the dancing behind as I went to pursue something that was, going to be more practical, at least in my case.
Seems like it was something totally different in terms of I could not feel something different in the spectrum. We've had former dancers on this podcast before, and it's been interesting what being trained in performance like that, in discipline, what it has brought to their professional lives. If you were to look back at that phase of your life, what do you think you retained from that?
I do think the discipline and the willpower, right? And sticking at something, even though it's hard. Those are things that I think come from a background in dance.
Yeah. And your poise, I think you have extremely poised presence, which people hear on the video. There's no video, we cannot see, but maybe that comes from posture, focus, and grace and poise.
Oh, thank you so much.
Definitely. When you look back now at your career and ups and downs, and I suppose wins and losses, as well as, I suppose, anything that you've learned lessons from, any setbacks or challenges, and any high points as well.
So I think one of the hardest times was relatively recently. I had left Providence. I mentioned I had left Providence St. Joseph Health. I cared for my father. I had 10 months with him before he passed, and I would not trade that time for anything. And it was really hard to land another allocator role. It's that low turnover again. I was also a generalist, and I didn't realize that that was going to work against me. I liken a chief investment officer to that of an orchestra conductor. And I grew up more on the public side of things. I like to say I grew up playing the piano and the violin. And all of a sudden, everyone wanted somebody who played the trumpet, as private equity. They wanted somebody who had been a specialist in that area. And I couldn't offer that. The other thing that I realized is that it didn't matter what my network was like within the CIO community, because chief investment officers are not hiring the next chief investment officer. It's the CFOs and the treasurers that were hiring the next chief investment officer. And I didn't have a network there. And so I was especially good at coming in second or close to second. And when I interviewed for this role, though, and my friends kept saying, it's just that the right one hasn't happened. And I thought, well, I don't know. I mean, do I need to leave this industry where I've developed all these skills? I was starting to consider that. And I interviewed for this role. And I remember saying to Brian, if this is my next position, it will have been worth the wait. And it was my next position, and it was worth the wait. It was, I have the best job I could possibly ever have, right? I get to use the skill set that I've spent many years developing and serve at the same time. And I get to spend my days thinking about how to make the world a better place on behalf of women who have spent their entire lives in service. And that to me is, it's perfect.
It sounds like you've told us your high point right there, unless there are more.
Yeah.
But that's wonderful. And then when you look at people who've been influential in this journey and maybe had a lasting impression on you, mentors, even outside your professional life, anyone that you can mention there?
So one of the greatest things about working for Wilshire at the time that I did was Roz Husseinian. So for any of your listeners who don't know Roz, she was the investment consultant to CalPERS for 20 years. And recently retired as the chief investment officer for the Helmsley Foundation. And to say that Roz is a force to be reckoned with is a bit of an understatement. And, I entered this business and I was pretty green, and she always made herself available to me. And so, I would walk in her office and I'd ask her a technical question, or sometimes I'd ask her things like, do I need to learn how to golf? And she looks up at me and I just remember her going, no. And I don't remember what else she said about that, but I'm like, okay, check. I don't have to pursue figuring out how to golf to be successful in this industry. And so 25 years later, I still count her among my dear friends. And that has been such a privilege.
I love that. I sadly have not managed to capture her voice for this podcast, but maybe someday we'll have to track her down. But her name has come up time and time again. She definitely does seem to have been a legend. And I think that's so important, just to have that sounding board for every question from the profound and central to the peripheral, but yet still important. So I think that's really interesting. And then looking at words of wisdom, I would imagine that you are encased now in a religious order that is basically known for its words of wisdom, its moral codes, its take on the meaning of life. Is there any that you have here, a creed or motto that you can share with us?
I do have a creed or motto, which is also my advice to my younger self, which is be sure that people know that I'm kind before they think that I'm smart. When I was younger, I always felt like I had to lead with smart. I mentioned that I was a first generation college student, and it was really important for me that people knew that I was smart. And I was probably in my 30s before I realized that what I was doing was putting up barriers to a relationship. Mm. And so when I stopped doing that, my life became much richer.
And that's fascinating. I'd love to just pull on that thread a little. This is an industry that's not known for its kindness, perhaps, at least not on its surface. How has that made a difference to you in terms of how do you go about making sure people know you are kind? And how has it made a difference?
So when I interact with anybody, really, but I'll use the example of a manager. In my younger years, I remember having this meeting, and years later, the manager said to me, we left your office and we said that was the best meeting we could have had and the worst meeting we could have had, meaning like I really told them what I thought was wrong. And I would do that differently now. I was probably a little more assertive in saying how smart I was in a way of being critical, and I would be gentler. Mm. Kindness is not a word we use often in this industry, but relationship is. Mm-hmm. And people always remember how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. And I want that to be a good experience.
It's fascinating. I wonder, I'd love to imagine, it's almost like a thought experiment, what our industry would be like if more people led with kindness. Would we achieve more performance-wise? Would we perhaps enjoy the journey a little more? And I think, well, we'll just have to ponder that one and come back to it. But thank you so much. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about your work today or your excitement for the future?
Well, I am excited for the future. And I just want to thank you for doing this work, for sharing our stories, and for reaching out. It took us a while to be able to get together, and I'm very grateful to you. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. You are a force of calm, tranquility, and steady commitment in our industry. And that is rare, but I'm glad it was worth the wait. Just as you said, your role in Mercy was worth the wait. I think the wait we had here was very much worth it. So thank you for coming and sprinkling some calm and some confidence. I think calm confidence in our industry, particularly in an area that has come under attack, the values-driven investing. I think it's nice to know that you are continuing to forge a path for the work you do, and that it goes unhalted by some of the headwinds.
Thank you so much.
I'm Aoife Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear from more inspiring investors and their personal stories, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find all of our content in the 50 Faces Hub, where you'll find a library of role models, resources, and other solutions to enhance your career. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organizations and affiliations of the host or any guest.